I'm David Allen, and this is one of a series of videos about the proposals in my new book, which is called The Living Vote. Now, in this video, I want to talk generally about PR systems, proportional representation, because most of the discussion about electoral reform over the years has been focused on one system or another of proportional representation. The idea being that you more closely equate people's votes with the seats that their members of parliament get. Now, that's a very superficial view. Now, apart from the fact that most PR systems are massively complicated and also gerrymander votes quite a lot, like single transferable vote, what you get at the end of the day isn't quite what is intended. Let me explain what I mean by that. Now, the proposals in my book and the voting system that I developed, which is also in the book, are designed to more closely match the wishes of the elector with the power that's exercised in their parliament. With PR, that doesn't really happen. Now, a very good example would be Sweden. Sweden has a fully proportional system. Everybody votes. It's entirely proportional. Every vote counts in the election. And if you get over 4% of the vote, if your party gets over 4% of the vote, which itself is an arbitrary benchmark, then your party will be allocated some seats in the Swedish Parliament. Now, that sounds fantastic. The thing that's missing, of course, in their system is there is no constituency representation. When I mention this concept to my Swedish friends and my Swedish second family, I get blank looks when you say, well, you can go and see your MP. You can actually turn up and just sit there and you can see him without an appointment. You can write to them and they will take up issues on your behalf. No such thing exists in Sweden. Once they're elected, they disappear into their political bubble and they don't really communicate with electors at all. However, as it turned out, the last general election in Sweden was in 2022, September. There were 8 parties that received representation, because 8 parties got more than 4% of the vote. Now, as it happened, and for the first time in quite a long time, the parties that represented, if you like, the right of politics had more seats than the parties representing the left. Now, Sweden's been run pretty much by the left for many, many years. So this was quite a change. As it turned out, there were 4 parties on the left, 4 parties on the right, which neatly split them, and the 4 on the right collected more votes than the 4 on the left. Now, that sounds fine. You say, well, that's okay, that's the will of the people, that's what happened, so the right of centre parties will form the government, which they did. However, the largest party on the right are a party called the Swedish Democrats. They got about 21.5% of the vote. However, as it turned out, the Swedish Democrats, the leader of the Swedish Democrats is not Sweden's Prime Minister, nor do the Swedish Democrats have any seats, any ministerial positions, rather. None of them. Not one. When they've got more votes than any other party on the right. Now, there's a Conservative Party in Sweden, and they came second with something like about 18 or 90% of the vote. But the problem was that the little party, the party with, I think, about 5% of the vote, didn't want the Swedish Democrats to have any ministerial positions because they don't like them. I know it's really bizarre, but it's quite akin to all the negative rhetoric that was thrown at UKIP over the years, when in fact they had quite a lot of support. and it was all unjustified, as it is unjustified for the Swedish Democrats. But what's happened is that the tiny party, and this often happens in coalitions, they would have brought down the government had the Swedish Democrats insisted on taking, in effect, their rightful place with their leader as Prime Minister, or Statsminister as it's called in Sweden, and taking the majority of important ministerial posts. But they didn't do that. The second largest party, the Conservatives, their leader is Prime Minister, and the ministerial jobs are bizarrely handed out to the Conservatives, rightly so, but also to a party that got hardly any support. Now, that is not what the electorate voted for, but it's what happens in proportional representation systems. That what you get at the end of the day, because of the disproportionate power that small parties have, you get a complete distortion. Anyway, what actually happened, which was a revelation really to us in the UK, is that Jimmy Åkesson, who is the leader of the Sweden Democrats, is a very smart cookie. And in the negotiations, because after the election nobody knows who the government's going to be, they go and sit behind closed doors to work out their differences. And in those negotiations, Jimmy Åkesson forwent any ministerial positions and his own position as Prime Minister, which rightfully would have been the right thing to do, in order to get agreement from all the other parties that their manifesto would be implemented in full. Now just think about that for a minute. This is a party that's saying no to posh jobs, but yes to what their voters voted for. Now, it's still early days. I mean, it's always difficult when you've got people of other parties actually holding the reins of power in ministerial positions, and the obvious obstruction that might occur, but the agreement was reached. Let's think about it. Once again, the top jobs were given up in order to implement what their voters voted for. Now let's compare that to our own Liberal Democrats in 2010. What a stark contrast that was. In 2010, the Liberal Democrats dumped their voters very heavily indeed in order to get posh jobs. The leader of the then Liberal Democrats was Nick Clegg, who took on the completely pointless but posh-sounding title of Deputy Prime Minister, and lots of Liberal Democrats took ministerial positions that they would never have got on their own merit. In order to do that, they needed to actually completely abandon their largest voting bloc, which were students, and this thing was about tuition fees. So they campaigned on abolishing tuition fees and wound up voting to increase them. Well, in 2010, the Liberal Democrats got about 56 seats, which put them in a position of power. In 2015, they got 8 seats, which showed what the people thought of them. But just think about the difference in approach. In the UK, the party went for what was best for them, what was best for their people. Sold the voters. In Sweden, the party that should have taken most of the ministerial positions and had its leader as Prime Minister gave all that up to make sure that their manifesto would be implemented. Now, I don't think you'll see that happen in many places. Politicians, in my view, tend to serve themselves first, their parties second, and the electorate come last. So that's quite an unusual thing that happened in Sweden. But it was brought about because of their voting system. A voting system which gives minorities huge power. Because if you have to make a coalition of 3, 4, 5, 6 different parties, and one of those parties has only got 2 seats, they can control everything. Because if you don't get them on your side, they can bring the whole government down. That shouldn't happen. That cannot happen under the FPTP-IND system, which is independents and party MPs. It just cannot happen. The party with the most votes will form the government, but in order to pass legislation, they will have to convince a proportion of the independent MPs to back them. This is a very appropriate dilution of government power, and it will lead to a better parliament. And you cannot have the ridiculous situation, as occurred in Sweden, brought about by superficially attractive PR systems that actually turn out to be worse than the system we have now. As usual, please subscribe to this channel, hit the like button, do share it, but most of all, do understand what these changes mean, that they are truly beneficial. Thank you for watching. Bye bye.